it's obviously a bit of a sinking ship, isn't it? I think that he is in trouble. He knows he's in trouble. Every poll suggests that the Tories are not going to win the next election, no matter what they do. And I think the fact that people are sort of leaping off the sides, shouting prayers as they go, is a bit of an indication that things are not well here.
Lots to talk about this morning with the writer and regular Times contributor Flic Everett. Good morning, Flic.
Hello, morning.
And the former editor of the FT in the studio with us, Lionel Barber. Good morning, Lionel.
Good morning.
Now, they're going to talk about Sunak's hospital pass, the future of water, and whether it is time to stop moaning and accept that we don't want to be parted for too long from our smartphones.
Yeah, let's start with Rishi Sunak and his interview with William Hague, the former Conservative leader, who's much better known as a Times radio panellist, about this time on a Tuesday. That's what he's really famous for, I believe. Until now, Rishi Sunak has resisted the urge to blame his troubles on his predecessors, but maybe he's changing tack slightly. He's been talking to William for his first interview for the Times Story podcast. Let's hear Rishi Sunak give his own explanation for why things are a bit tricky.
I think someone described it as the worst hospital pass for any incoming Prime Minister in however many decades. And look, clearly it's been there's lots of frustrations. We've been through a lot as a country over the past few years, which people are understandably frustrated about. It makes the environment trickier. But I'm entirely confident that there are better times ahead. And in spite of the challenges that the country's been through, whether that's COVID, the pandemic, the impact of that on everyone, and just as we were recovering from that, to get hit by a war in Ukraine and the impact on energy bills, that's a tough few years.
Flic, is it possible for Rishi Sunak to get any electoral headway by blaming his predecessor? Because the argument is, of course, he didn't serve with Liz Truss as when she was Prime Minister, but he did serve as Chancellor for Boris Johnson. Is there any argument that he can make here that will succeed when he says, well, I've just been given an impossible job?
I don't think it's ever a good idea to start by blaming the ex-incumbent. I think the initial feeling amongst the electorate listening to that would be, well, you pitched for the job, you wanted to be Prime Minister, it's your job to get us out of it, not to moan about what we're in. It's a bit like when this government complained about not having any money when they came in. It's like, well, we wouldn't start from here, but here we are, and we're going to make the best of it. And I don't think anybody likes a leader relying on victimhood or suggesting that they were dealt a bad hand. That might well be the case. Nobody would want to come in after Liz Truss, let's be honest. But I do think that as he is the incumbent Prime Minister, he should be saying, I did my best, I wanted to be Prime Minister, I felt I could sort the country out, and if I haven't achieved it, that's on me, rather than saying, oh, it wasn't me, she let me down, I didn't have the tools. If you want to be Prime Minister, you have to accept that it's your job to bring the tools, I think.
I wonder, Lionel, whether this boils down in the end to 14 years, that ultimately, whatever Rishi Sunak says or does, he's going to carry the can for 14 years, and that's a very, very long time in politics, where lots of things will have gone wrong by definition.
Steady on, Stig. You're asking me to feel sorry for him. I mean, who is advising the Prime Minister? This is insanity. I mean, you're not going to get anywhere by essentially blaming your predecessor, saying what a tough job it is. What you have to do is say, what are you going to do about it? I mean, I think it's fair to talk about the unexpected events, a war in Ukraine, COVID, once-in-a-century pandemic, that's fine. But to sort of blame it on the hospital pass, besides, he asked, as Flick's saying, he wanted to do the job. So I'm afraid I think this is it's a losing strategy.
What strategy would you suggest to him then? Because this is the problem, because we have lots of people getting in touch, and they've warmed up a bit as the morning's gone on. But really, they are still effectively saying he's trying to be competent.
I think he is competent, and I think he's extremely hardworking, and I think he's a very decent man, and who is doing a difficult job. But what he has to do is give that sense two things. One, by the way, am I being paid for this advice? But no, but what he has to...
He always listens at 9 o'clock, actually, so yeah, he's listening.
I'm going to tell Asma. What he has to do is say, one, patience. Everybody's in such a hurry. Let's just think about where we're heading. I have given the country a sense of direction, and as he sort of hinted, things are getting better inflation is coming down. The interest rate interest rates are going to be cut.
Is he competent though, in terms, Lionel, of his staff selection, shall we say, his personnel? I was just trying to write down a list there. Dominic Raab, Suella Braverman, Lee Anderson. They were his people, and he appointed them, and they all had to go.
Well, it's a very thin bench. I mean, it's after 14 years,
but that's
and half the party.
His judgment, though.
Well, as I said, you always hope if you're running a sports team or a newspaper that who's on the bench, and the fact is, this is where the 14-year point does come in, plus Brexit, where a lot of people are just sidelined. You actually don't have a lot of talent around. And by the way, where I do feel sorry for him is, it's Tuesday who's resigned today.
Mm, well, there you go. Exactly. Flic, what about the personnel issues?
What about them? I mean, yes, it's obviously a bit of a sinking ship, isn't it? I think that he is in trouble. He knows he's in trouble. Every poll suggests that the Tories are not going to win the next election, no matter what they do. And I think the fact that people are sort of leaping off the sides, shouting prayers as they go, it's a bit of an indication that things are not well here. But I don't think as a prime minister, he can dwell too much on that. I mean, at the public face, he has to sort of suggest that everything's fine. He's competent. He's in control. If people want to leave, that's up to them. But in a healthy government, you don't get people leaving and going to rival parties. You just don't. And I think that the fact that this is happening to such an extent, particularly lately, is very alarming for him, and it's also very destabilizing for the government as well.
Someone's boiled this down in a text. What's wrong with Rishi, the Tory party? Which I think
the answer is a lot.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the issue. Would you advise him to have an election, Lionel? Because it seems that's an impossible question as well, because you preach patience, rightly so, things will get better. But yet the May elections are going to happen. They're probably going to get an absolute shooing. The level of moaning within the Tory party is going to get higher and higher and higher. The possibility of more resignations, more defections, a summer of discontent, and then an election. Some people might say, do you know what? It looks awful now. Just wait till November. You better pull the plaster off in May or June. Were you on that side of the argument, or is your patience to say wait till as long as possible?
So I think this is what you'd call in opera the Götterdämmerung sort of solution. Let's just have it done right into the flames. No,
a lot of people think that. A lot of people think that.
And you're going to get the same conspiracies and leadership plots. And of course, it must be enormously frustrating for him. But I would say take it on the chin in May, play the expectations game. It is going to be tough. Then battle through the summer as maybe a bit of economic evidence gets better. Then everybody goes on a holiday, and then prepare for an early October election, and just hope that things just get that little bit of better with tangible evidence. But that's what I would play for.
Flic,
but hey, I'm not running the government.
No, Flic, you're now running the government with Lionel. Lionel wants an October election. What's your advice?
No, we're going to be arguing about this in the tea room, because I think bring it on. I think, if they can't win an election in May, they're not going to win it in October either. I don't want them to win it on a personal level, and I don't think the country wants them to win it. So I think better to get it over with, give Labour the summer to settle in, assuming they're the winners, and, use the time as Tories to regroup and work out what went wrong. I mean, it's been 14 years, and that's too long for any single government to be in power, in my opinion. It always goes wrong at that point. So I think there's no point prolonging the agony. It might be better for Rishi Sunak, but it's definitely not better for the electorate or for the country.
It'll be interesting to see whether the Rishi Sunak, as you said, Lionel, can actually take the local elections, if they're bad, on the chin and get to October or November. But we'll see. We could talk about this for half an hour.
No, we could. I just wanted to say that I was just advising Rishi Sunak. For me, I'd rather have an election sooner.
Oh, right. Okay. Fair enough. Well, everyone's got their own personal reasons, haven't they, for when they want an election. Yeah. Ali says, I don't have the luxury of time when it comes to waiting for Sunak's plans to take shape. My bills are getting bigger, and telling the councils or companies that I'll say when things improve in 2 or 3 years, or I'll pay, in fact, when things improve in 2 or 3 years, will will not work. Right, we're going to talk about Thames Water now, because that is a big story, really. Earlier this morning, the shareholders of Thames Water, which is the country's biggest water company, announced they will not be putting any new money in. They were due to invest £500 million by the end of March, but have now said that the company's turnaround plan is uninvestable. Lionel, what do you make of what is happening, and do you think that they can be persuaded or not, the shareholders?
No, I don't think that they're going to put up extra money. They want the company, and therefore the regulator also, to increase water bills by something like 40%, massive, to fund investment in the waterways and cleanup, which they should have done years ago. So I think there's a complete standoff. There are two conclusions here. One is that privatization was an utter disaster. There was a totally ineffective regulator, and the private equity companies loaded these utilities up with debt, took dividends, and the public interest, which was having a proper, efficient, modern provision of water, was ignored. So I don't think Thames Water goes bust, but I think you'll have a standoff, and they're going to have to find some way of raising the money elsewhere.
Do you think that, and this is not going to be popular, but do you think that we actually, perhaps, this is very, I can't really want to say this, that at some point the consumers perhaps may have to pay more because it's been underpriced historically? That's one argument, isn't it?
I'm not sure it has been underpriced. I mean, given the service and given the amount of sewage flowing in the waterways.
But historically,
I'm not sure that is the case. I would argue that the problem was that the shareholders and the private equity companies took too much money out in terms of dividend. And by the way, this was a financial engineering exercise. I don't want to confuse everybody with talk about securitization and stuff, but that was the model. You basically had a reliable cash flow, and you could take large dividends and load up on debt at a time when interest rates were very low. And of course, interest rates going back up, that's where the whole model broke down. So I'm afraid, it's a really, really telling story about bad policy, poor regulation.
it's a very